Hello, everyone. And today we are at the AHC Roundhouse for their fall steam up, which we'll be taking a tour and riding one of the trains there, and also filming trains and stuff will have to get cut out because people asked me to. And yeah, so stick around. I hope you enjoy the video and have fun.
projects can be done inside the roundhouse proper, but the heavy-duty stuff gets brought here to the back shop. And it doesn't get much more heavy-duty than this thing right here. This is Bessemer and Lake Erie Railroad number 643, a massive Texas-style steam locomotive built for heavy-duty iron ore service, hauling iron ore trains from the boat docks in Pontiac, Ohio, down to Pittsburgh. Those iron ore trains weighed about 13,000 tons collectively, and in order to get them across the state line into Pennsylvania, they had to go uphill. Now, a 0.9% grade doesn't sound like much, but when your train consists of not one but 3 of these locomotives and 124-foot-long cars stacked to the gills with iron ore, the back end of the train is about 24 vertical feet lower than the front of the train. So you need a lot of power to get those trains over the hill. And like I mentioned, you needed 3. 1 on the head end to pull, 2 on the back end to shove. Once they got across the state line to Albion, Pennsylvania, the 2 helpers on the back end would uncouple, and the lead unit would take it the rest of the way for a level stretch down towards North Bessemer, just 30 miles north of Pittsburgh. It would then be turned around and sent back up to Pontiac in coal trains. So very good for long trains full of heavy stuff. 643 is the longest, heaviest, strongest locomotive in our possession at 112 feet long, 16 feet 2 inches high, weighing in at 450 tons. Without coal and water, the tender that this monster totes behind it holds 23,000 gallons of water and 26 tons of coal. Big, monstrous, heavy engine, though still not as big as steam locomotives were built. There were certainly other engines built bigger than this thing, but those will not fit here at the Age of Steam Roundhouse. So we are very fortunate to have this one. It will probably be the biggest thing in our collection until the end of time. Do you fire it? Good question. I get to that right now. So we are cosmetically restoring it. We are only restoring it on the outside. We're not restoring it to run. The reason being is that as of right now, all we have as far as train rides here at the museum property is what you've experienced here today, up and back. Now, 12 is able to do that and at least look like it's working a little hard. If you couple this thing up to the head end of your little 2-coach train, that would be monstrous overkill. Now, we could theoretically take it out beyond our properties onto the main line that runs outside of our grounds here. The only problem is that the culverts in the area around us were not built to handle the massive weight of this machine. Now, we could fortify the culverts, but we can't go out on the main line running train rides, at least as of right now. The Tennessee-Wyoming Railroad, who currently owns that line, wants nothing to do with steam-powered passenger excursions and the liability and insurance costs that come with that. This was intended to be the mascot of the non-Disney roundhouse on our table. How many of you are familiar with the Union Pacific Big Boy? Okay, good number. Very good. For those of you that are not, Union Pacific Big Boy steam locomotives are some of the largest steam locomotives ever built. They are articulated. They essentially have 2 steam engine sets, 2 sets of driving wheels. The first one is articulated, which allows it to oscillate back and forth, allowing the engine to negotiate tighter curves. That machine is 132 feet long, 643 by about 20 feet in length, and weighs in at 1.2 billion pounds. Massive machine. That thing cannot go any farther east than Chicago. The Union Pacific does have one big boy that they run for public relations tours and train rides. Because of how massive it is, it will never make it all the way out here to Ohio's Amish country. It is just not. Now, like I said, we're only cosmetically So the diesels are a lot more convenient to utilize. The Fairbanks Horse Company, built in 1852, was more famously remembered for building opposed piston diesel engines that were used in submarines. They also applied those same vertically opposed piston engines to diesel locomotives. We have 1852 here and a matching twin that sits outside in red like Canadian striping. We acquired both of our Fairbanks Horse diesel locomotives from eBay. Don't ask me how much it was. Now on track 3 here, we have a good example of a cosmetic restoration pretty much completed. Come down here, we'll let everyone kind of fill in here so that they can see. Locomotive number 1187 here was acquired from the Strasburg Scenic Railroad out near Lancaster, Pennsylvania. For a hot second in history, the Strasburg Railroad used this one for their excursion trains for about 6 weeks, but this engine just was not fit for the type of work that they needed it to handle. This little locomotive was built as a yard switch, similar in purpose to number 12. So built to stay inside of a railroad yard, not very far away from a refueling site, just running from one end of the rail yard to the other at the lowest notice. But this is very unique for our collection because it's one of only 3 remaining camelback steam locomotives in the United States. What I mean by camelback is that the cab that the crew sits in to run the locomotive is situated over the center of the boiler, not situated on the back end behind the cab and firebox. The reasoning for that is because 1187 and other camelback locomotives were built to burn a very specific sort of fuel. Anyone wager a guess at what this is? Very good. It is coal, but more specifically, anthracite. Anthracite coal, or clean coal, or hard coal. This is how it looks straight out of the ground. Come on over here and just give it a rub. Now show me your hand. Show them your hand. Clean coal. Now, most steam locomotives, like most of the engines in our collection, burn this. This is coal. This is soft bituminous coal that is readily available throughout most of the mountainous regions of the United States. Very easy to obtain, but very dirty. Now, when you burn this stuff, you shoot out a lot of hot cinders, embers, soot, sparks, and ash all over the place. My shirt is currently peppered with soot from number 12 since she's been running around today and yesterday. But when you burn anthracite coal, you don't get that. You don't get any of the filthy soot and ash, and you get white smoke instead of the thick black stuff. So anthracite was very good for burning if you didn't want to upset anyone that was standing at the side of the tracks. More often than not, anthracite was burned to heat homes and office buildings. But in order to use it in a large steam locomotive, you had to specially build the machine in order to handle it. Anthracite doesn't burn as readily as the soft bituminous coal, so you need a lot of heat energy to get it ignited. That requires a lot of air drafted up into the firebox. The firebox of a steam locomotive is not 100% enclosed. It is hollow in the bottom, with grates situated all throughout the bottom of it to allow the coal to sit on it, but also to allow airflow up into the firebox that allows the fire to continue burning. So to burn anthracite, you need a wider firebox to get more air drafted up into the machine to allow the anthracite to ignite and continue burning. So Mr. John Wooten, who was once the president of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, the railroad our little camelback originally came from, devised this very wide, shallow firebox. It was called the Wooten style of firebox. But because it was so wide, you couldn't build a cab on the back end of that and still expect the engine to fit around the tightly enclosed environments it was expected to squeeze through. So they just moved the cab up a little forward. That being said, the engineer is seated on this side. The fireman is at the back of the engine shoveling coal. The front end brakeman is on the opposite side of the engine's boiler. Do you think it was easy each other over the ruckus of the steam engine working and operating. It was very difficult. Communication was one of the biggest drawbacks of the Camelback design, and on top of that, they were very dangerous. The engineer is seated right over the driving wheels where the heavy steel driving rods are powering the engine. And in the case of Camelback locomotives built for high-speed passenger service, those rods are spinning around multiple times a second. If any of those rods happen to snap off and get shot straight up into the air, who's going to go with it? The guy driving, yes. And on top of that, if you take a gander inside the cab of this thing, you can see where all the different devices that the engineer uses to operate the locomotive, throttle, tricots, injector valves, all of those things which are bolted to the locomotive's boiler are right at eye level. So if any of those devices fail, the raw steam from the boiler is going to come shooting straight out at you. That's not going to be fun. Safety first, yes. So the Camelback design was not very popular. There were no new Camelbacks built after about the 1920s because locomotive technology and development had just gotten to a point where the Camelback design was no longer necessary, but these machines were still operated until the end of steam. Out of all of them, though, only 3 have made it into preservation. We have this one here. There's another one at the Museum of Transportation in St. Louis, and another one at the B&O Railroad Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. So very rare little pieces, has been cosmetically restored by our shop forces, which included building a brand new cab for that thing out of wood, using only the splintered pieces of the remaining cab that were delivered to us. Very good work. Now come on over here. We'll center ourselves between these 2 big engines. You've seen the 643 already. It's the longest and it's the strongest engine that we have, but we have the silver and bronze metals in terms of size right here. One down. Still in here. The silver metal in terms of size here at Age of Steam is nickel plate road number 763, an S2 class Berkshire type steam locomotive built for high-speed freight service. Now, typically freight trains were not expected to run at high speeds, but the nickel plate wasn't just handling generic freight, they were also handling perishable goods. We're talking about fruits, vegetables, and raw meats. They essentially connected the farmers of the American West to the urban markets on the East Coast. And this was before modern refrigeration technology was commonplace on America's railroads, so those food items that they were transporting had a real chance to spoil if they didn't make it to their destinations on time. So not only did 763 have to be strong to head up a 3,000 to 5,000 ton consist of perishable freight, she also had to be particularly speedy. In the case of 763, with such a heavy train behind her, she can reach speeds upwards of 70 miles an hour. Now, 70 miles an hour is classic highway speeds that we can attain in our cars these days very easily, but consider now that your vehicle is about 10 and a half feet wide, nearly 16 feet tall, 101 feet long, and when fully loaded with coal and water, weighing in at just over 100 or 400 tons. Good Lord, I'm getting ahead of myself. And carrying all of that weight behind you at 70 miles an hour. These machines shook the ground under your feet when they moved down at high speed. Unfortunately, ours will not be doing that anytime soon. She's not in running condition. However, she's one of 6 similar locomotives from the nickel plate road that have made it into preservation, one of whom still runs. You're looking for nickel plate road number 765. 765 is only a few days younger than our 763, also built by the Lima Locomotive Works of Lima, Ohio. You'll find 765 out in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society runs that locomotive all over the Midwest. Now, sometimes 765 comes over here to Ohio. Are any of you familiar with the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad? For those of you that are not, it runs between Independence and Akron, Ohio. They do occasionally get 765 out to their railroad, 1 or 2 weekends out of the year. They haven't had it back for about the last few years at this point due to some track issues that they've been dealing with. But keep an eye out on their website for when 765 returns. I've seen it multiple times and it still never gets old. It is fantastic to see one of these big, heavy machines just running. It's fantastic. Now, as far as our founder is concerned, before he built this roundhouse, he used to own and operate his own railroad, what he called the Ohio Central Railroad, starting in 1988. He began with his first 70 miles of track, which is actually the line just outside of our property here. And in 1989, he began running tourist trains here in the area, powered by steam locomotives, running from the depot in downtown Sugar Creek down to Baltic, just about 7 miles between Sugar Creek and Baltic, and then back. It's about a 14-mile round trip, and if the train runs at about 15 to 25 miles an hour, that trip will take about an hour. This was the largest steam locomotive that our founder ran on his railroad, and he didn't fire it up for those little 14-mile round trip trains. This was much too big for that. This was really only fired up for special occasions or photo charters, things like that. Grand Western number 6325 was built by Alco, American Locomotive Company, in 1942. This is the third largest steam locomotive in our collection at 95 feet long, weighing in at about 336 tons, and it was good for general service. It could head up a heavy freight train if necessary, but it was most commonly seen on fast passenger trains. This is the fastest steam locomotive in our possession. It also has the tallest driving wheels in our possession. With steam locomotives, the taller the driving wheels are, the faster they are able to go, but that does sacrifice a bit of lost strength. So when you're looking at these machines at a glance, the shorter the wheels, the more power the locomotive puts out, the more likely it is used for freight service. The taller the wheels are, the faster it can go, the more likely it is used for passenger service or carrying mail. Mail actually held priority over any and all other train services because it was done for the federal government. So, 6325 has 73-inch diameter driving wheels, allowing her to attain a top official speed that we know of 90 miles an hour. But I do know 2 stories that may allude to this machine being able to go even faster. One story that I've heard came from one of our museum's board members. He apparently found physical evidence of a sister locomotive to this one built just like it, working on the Grand Trunk Western, achieving a speed of 106.5 miles per hour. The second story I know comes from another one of our tour guides here at the museum. He heard it from the last voting board member of the original restoration group that tried to restore this thing when it was on display up in Battle Creek, Michigan, who heard it from his neighbor who once used to run this thing. According to that individual, he was able to get 6325 herself up to 114 miles per hour, and in doing so was not able to stop it in time when it came into the station platform at the end of the line that he was running. If the story is to be believed, he plowed through the concrete barrier at the end of the line with this locomotive and was given a 30-day vacation for that. Now, I have done some minor research into both of those stories to see if either of them are true. As of right now, I've come up empty-handed. However, if you look at the front of 6325, she has a nicely cast front cow catcher or pilot. This is a typical Alco curved front cow catcher, very similar to what you find on Big Boy as well, who was also built by Alco. Comes to a nicely rounded point here at the very front end of it. If you follow this point all the way to the bottom, there's a dent here right at the very bottom of the front of this thing. Now, that dent is going to come from anything. When these machines were being run on a daily basis all throughout the year, they ran into any number of different things that may have strayed across the track. Whether it was tree limbs, vehicles, livestock, worst case scenario, even people, and any of those things single-digit speeds, built with driving wheels 8 inches, 4 inches tall. But in any of those reservations, they are held on ominously by the museum or restoration crew that actually has them. And in order to acquire those for our museum, would probably require a price tag that we're not going to be able to pay. Now, coming from our internet all the way over here to our smallest and the oldest. Our museum of the 14 smallest locomotive in our collection, weighs in at almost 23.5 tons, was built by the H.K. Porter Company in 1897. This is the oldest steam locomotive in our possession that was built during the 1800s. Another good example of a steam locomotive built for a very specific sort of job. This could carry a few carloads at a time and couldn't really go very fast, but it didn't need to. It was running around a steel foundry. You really didn't have many opportunities to run your equipment very fast around such a busy facility unless you wanted to risk your job by running into another piece of equipment or running over someone. So this was very good for just hustling a few carloads of materials around the foundry at any given time, but that was pretty much it. This is basically the steam locomotive equivalent of a forklift or a tow motor. The only other thing this steam locomotive was good for was being a public display piece. Our steam locomotives are very difficult to get in and out of. 14, not so much. 14 sits low enough to the ground that we can easily let people climb in and out of the cab of this thing. The cab is where the crew operates the locomotive from, and all the devices you see intact here inside the locomotive are installed. Every steam locomotive standing around us here has some version of these different devices. It's just a matter of scale. This engine is very small, very basic. 6325 is very big or small. So it's got more technologically advanced versions of things that you see here. Now, for the kids, if you stick with me through the entire tour, and if you need aid from your parents or grandparents, let you climb up into the cab of this thing after the tour. Alright, perfect. Now then, let's go on over here. I did say that 6325 was much too big for our family's day-to-day excursion trips here in the Sugar Creek area, so what did he use? He actually used these next 3 steam engines here in the collection, starting with number 13 here, and then 1293 right behind me, and 1551 on the next track over. These 3 locomotives were the excursion stars of our founder's Ohio Central Railroad. If you were able to take a ride on our founder's railroad here in Sugar Creek, one of these 3 machines carried your train. If you did so, take a look back at your photographs and see which one it was. Now, starting with 13, she was the second steam locomotive that our founder acquired for excursion service, built by Alco in 1920 for the Kelly's Creek and Northwestern Railroad, a short line down in West Virginia. She hauled coal and lumber for the Kelly's Creek until being retired and then later adopted by the Buffalo Creek and Raleigh Railroad. They tasked this machine with hauling coal between Dundon and Whiten, West Virginia, going downhill with the loaded trains and carrying the empty cars back uphill to the mine. So a particularly strong little engine able to carry about 60 loaded cars of coal at any given time. Very good for hauling heavy trains on short branch lines like our founder's railroad. She assisted not just on the passenger trains, but also the occasional freight trains. Now, 1293 is the largest of these 3 that we are currently looking at. Without the tender that she goes behind her, you're looking at about 117 tons of locomotive. This is the youngest steam engine in our collection. She was built in June of 1940 as modern of steam locomotives as possible, able to handle passenger trains or freight trains if ever necessary. They are light enough to run on branch lines and fast enough to run out on the main lines at higher speeds. She has 70-inch diameter driving wheels, allowing her to hit speeds between 75 to 80 miles per hour very effectively. So a very nice machine. The Canadian Pacific Railroad was so impressed with these things that if it weren't for the encroachment of diesel electrics on the railroads, they were prepared to order 500 of these things. But only 102 were ever constructed, and out of that large family of machines, only 6 of them have made it into preservation. There are different railroad museums between here in North America and up in Canada, and out of those surviving 6, we actually have 2 of them. Well, 93 is the nicer looking of the 2. She's actually in good enough mechanical condition that we could fire her up and run her today if we so chose to do, except without you guys here. With steam locomotives, if you want to run them for the general public, like what we're doing with number 12 outside, their boilers, their big cylindrical bodies have to be inspected by the federal government at least every 15 years, or every 1,472 operating days, but I really won't get into that. You have to get the boiler ultrasounded. The government needs to know how thick the boiler's metal is. It needs to be thick enough to hold the engine's operating speed pressure. In the case of our collection, that ranges between 150 psi. So if it can handle that, they will approve you. You do whatever mechanical maintenance needs to be done, and the locomotive can be run for another 15 years. But once that time comes up, no matter how good of a condition the engine is in, that's it. You have to take it out of service, and you can't run it for the general public again until you get it boiler re-certified. I'll get into a little more detail on that as we move throughout the tour. Now, coming up here to 1551, she's the smallest of our founders excursion trio, built by the Montreal Locomotive Corps in April of 1912. It goes to the world history. That's also the exact same one that Titanic now, this is built. She was built for the Canadian Northern Railroad and was most commonly seen heading up to the trains around the city of Montreal. 67-inch diameter driving wheels giving her a good amount of low grip to start a light passenger train at a moment's notice. And with the size of the wheels, she can hit speeds in excess of 70 miles an hour with one of those passenger trains. So very nice for light passenger trains. A nice acquisition by our founder. 1551 started this steam excursion program single-handedly, running excursion trains multiple times a day, 6 days out of the week between the months of May and October, doing that by herself without any major mechanical failures. Which to me is amazing, considering she's the oldest of these great steam locomotives. She was now halfway through her most recent restoration to full operating condition when everything was brought out here to the new roundhouse museum. So that's why when you're looking at this thing in comparison to 13 and 1293, the other 2 are pretty well going back to the average rate, but what they do today, 1293 out of the book, but 1551 kind of sitting around here in the park. She's about a half foot back together right now. Some of the pieces are scattered around the roundhouse itself. That is part of the reason why the astronauts go down the aisles in between the engine. We have a lot of parts for these machines stored down in the aisles, mostly on pallets that are very easy to trip over. We also have them stored up against the wall here along the tour route. And if you're curious as to which locomotive those pieces belong to, for the most part they are labeled, either with a paint marker or, in the case of these main rods here, with a paper tag. The paper tag on those main rods say 401. We have yet to see locomotive 401 yet on the tour, but those belong to it. 1551's main rods, which look very similar to those, are actually down here against the wall in stall 11, right next to the bench. So hopefully it won't be long before 1551 is at least put back together, if not restored to operating condition. Yes? Yes, very good question. So, for the electronic the classification lights that look like eyeballs there on the front, if the locomotive has an electronic bell ringer, all of those electrical devices need power. Steam locomotives were pretty much self-sustaining, using the steam that they generated in their boilers. In the case of 1551, look at the top of the boiler. Start from the very front and go all the way back towards the cab where the crew sits. Right behind that small dome there, there's a little cylindrical looking device right back there. That is an electric generating dynamo that uses steam from the engine's boiler to turn a little turbine inside of there. That provides enough electricity for the devices that are on the locomotive itself. That doesn't supply enough electricity for the rest of the train. If passenger cars need electricity, more often than not, they have their own singular generators, usually using gasoline or diesel fuel to generate the electricity that they need. But for steam locomotives, when it came to the electricity that they needed or the compressed air that they needed for the modern braking systems, all of that was generated on the locomotive using devices that siphon steam from the boiler itself. And quite frankly, locomotive boilers were, at least more so with the modern examples, they were built to generate far more steam than they could ever possibly use for that purpose, along with others. All right, come on down here. I did say we had 2 locomotives in our collection, just like 1293. Here's her sister, number 1278, built a few months prior to 1293. Again, good for freight or passenger service on the branch lines or main lines. We have tried to restore a little bit of 1278's original Canadian appearance. If you look at the headlight here at the front, it's much more basic. It's just a little canister light as opposed to the examples we see on 1551 and 1293, which have number boards splayed out on either sides and a nice visor over the lens. Those are more American style of headlights. The Canadian Pacific was rather utilitarian. They really didn't spend the money to add all the additional flourishes and accents if they really didn't have to. And then on the top of this engine's face there, right on its forehead, is a rectangular number board. 1293 used to have a similar headlight and number board on its forehead, but those were replaced sometime during its preservation years for a more American-looking headlight, and instead of the number board, it's got a nice shiny brass bell mounted right on its forehead, very similar to many American steam locomotives. Now, to finish off the Canadian portion of our tour, we have number 96, smallest and oldest of our 4 Canadian steam locomotives, built by the Montreal Locomotive Works for the Grand Trunk Railway of Canada in 1910. Very good for short branch line services, following either short passenger trains or light freight trains. And Mr. Jacobson did purchase 96 with the intention of restoring it to running condition. It's just at the time that 96 was acquired, we already had 15, 51, and 13. They were much bigger than this one. They were in running condition, and even after a locomotive is restored to running condition, it still needs regular maintenance, which is very, very expensive. It's one of the main reasons why many excursion operations don't run steam, at least not on a regular basis. It is very expensive to maintain and operate these steam locomotives. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. That's all right. I fully understand. I wish we could get this building air conditioned. Did any of these engines crack? As far as I know, none of them were wrecked, but 1278 had a bit of a nasty incident back in 1995.
Hello everyone, I'm here to interrupt my own video because the guy at the AJ Roundhouse requested to me not to share this part that he's about to share with us on tour at AJ Roundhouse. I wish I could, but pretty sure you can find it on Wikipedia, and if you want to find out, you could go to the website or just take a tour of the Roundhouse, and they tell the story there. Anyways, back to the video, y'all.
if you do see a steam locomotive rated in horsepower, that's usually at a typical operating speed. So like Big Boy, the big massive engine I was talking about at the beginning of the tour, that thing puts out, if I'm remembering correctly, about 7,000 horsepower at about 50 or 55 miles an hour, which isn't as fast as the engine can go. And with steam locomotives, the faster it's going, the higher its horsepower rating climbs. So again, very inconsistent with horsepower, but with tractive effort, you know how much power is being put right to the rail the moment the engine starts up. Now, in the interest of time, I will kind of hop and skip through some of the engines here in the last portion of the collection. Like Euro 5 here, it's a little smaller, not the super spectacular engine, but it was built by Volvo in 1917 for Sherman Gravel Company that was headquartered out in Columbus, and it was used to haul gravel cars out of their pits down in Circleville, if any of you are from that area or familiar with them. But let's come down here to 401. What I'd like to talk about with 401 is how much one of these steam locomotives can cost you here in the 21st century. Now, 401 isn't the biggest steam engine that we have, but it's still relatively big. One of the longer steam engines in our collection, rather trim piece though. Just at a glance, looking at this thing, how much do you think it would cost? Is not actually powered by steam. That would be number one here. Number one is a wireless locomotive. It does not have a firehouse. It doesn't burn any fuel to generate steam. And it doesn't even use steam. It's powered by compressed air. Now, a typical steam locomotive boiler can get up to a maximum of about 300 psi. This thing runs at about 800 to 1200 psi of air. There was a gentleman on one of our tours a couple of years ago that was very familiar with pressure vessels, and he told us that if we ever got this thing up to its standard operating pressure, he didn't want to be any closer than about 3 miles away from it. So very dangerous if not contained, but it does have these big heavy-headed stables to keep the air vents together, to keep all of that air pressure in. Now, something like this would not be seen running out on the main lines on the fast passenger trains or heavy freight trains. This thing was used for smaller industrial jobs. This was actually operated on a sugarcane plantation down in Cuba originally, but you also probably saw these compressed air engines operating around munitions plants, textile mills, power plants, and even down in mine shafts. These things were safe to operate because they didn't shoot out any hot embers or sparks like a classic fired steam locomotive, something that burns coal or wood, would not be safe operating around those kinds of environments. So the compressed air design was very safe. Their only caveat was that they didn't go very far before they had to be recharged again. Now, considering how big this thing is, it is considered by us to be the largest remaining example of a compressed air locomotive. We have not found any evidence to prove us otherwise considering that. But judging by how big this thing is, how many miles do you think you would get out of this thing? And if you already know, I'll let them guess. How many miles do you think this would go? That would be amazing. That would be amazing. Any other guesses? 10. What about you? 5? You're closer. 7. You're looking at 7 miles for about an hour and a half's worth of work before the engine needs to be recharged again. Very inconvenient when you're running strict deadlines in an industrial operation. So, most of the compressed air engines were scrapped or replaced with numbers and it's fine. You're still working with a wireless locomotive, but we're back to using steam. It's just not steam that it generates for itself. Number 2 is what you would call a wireless cooker or a thermos bottle steam locomotive. What you're seeing here is sheet metal that covers about 6 inches of thermal insulation that wraps around a large cylindrical tank, very similar to the air tank on number 1, but much bigger. Now you fill that tank up with about 4/5 of the way to the top with superheated water. find in the large stationary boilers around a power plant. Number 2 here, operating around the Columbus and Southern Ohio Electric Company's Pickaway Power Plant, just outside of Columbus, so a very appropriate environment. You just siphon some of the water off of those boilers, fill this engine up, and the rest of the space inside of it will be taken up by the steam pressure that the boiling water will generate. Now, when you shake up a pop can, when does it burst? Does it just burst automatically, or does it burst after you pop the tab? After. Very good. It bursts after you pop the tab. You're relieving the pressure inside of the can, allowing the shaken up pop to explode out of it. Those same principles were put to work in this locomotive. So, if steam is not being drawn from the engine to do anything, either to run the locomotive, create compressed air for the braking system, or blow the whistle, the water inside of the engine, as hot as it is, will remain in a liquid state until pressure is relieved from inside of it. So if the engineer opens the throttle, vents steam down to the working components to move the engine around, the water inside will come back to life. It will start bubbling and boiling again to generate steam to fill in that empty pressure space inside the locomotive. Using those thermal principles, a locomotive like number 2 could run for about 6 to 8 hours straight until it needs to be recharged again. Very good for the industrial purposes that the compressed air engines were built for, but could last much longer. And a lot of these have made it into preservation. The next closest one to us is actually just a half-hour drive east of here over in Denison. So very close. All right, come on over here. We'll come down to the last track here inside the roundhouse. 4 tank engines in our collection, varying in size, and actually our newest addition to the collection is our biggest tank engine. Let's head out here to the turntable pit area. Please do not go any farther than the raised pressed gravel and wood. All the tame gravel elements is still settling into the ground. They're all relatively operational. The largest tank engine in our possession, weighing in at 98 3/4 tons, making it heavier than some of our smaller tender locomotives here in the collection. For frame of reference, with 13 right here, without number 13's tender, just the locomotive weighs 99 tons. So 13 only beats 37 by a mere quarter of a ton. So it's a big, beefy tank engine. It was also built for the lumber industry, same industry that our number 19 in the back shop was built for. And it arrived here back in January, just before 643 got here. If any of you were able to watch the looping video inside of our visitor center, we actually have footage of this one being unloaded from its truck trailer here on site. And it looks a heck of a lot better now. Pretty much the only thing that I know of that's missing from this thing is the front pilot. So for the most part, this engine is pretty well put back together, but here in America, a steam locomotive needs to have something on the front end of it, whether it is a cow catcher or step boards on the front of the engine to not only allow men to climb up and down the front of the locomotive with relative ease, but to also protect the wheels of the machine in case it runs into something. You don't want whatever it hits to run underneath the wheels and potentially derail it. That is the main function of the cow catcher. It's not to save anything that stumbles out in front of a steam locomotive, especially with some of our bigger ones. Anything that gets in front of it is toast. So you're really just trying to protect the train from derailing and causing a much bigger accident. after it does, it will get bolted to the front of this thing. All right, so that pretty much finishes things up here. I appreciate you sticking around with me. I know it's very hot, but I know I promised the kids bell ringing. So if you would like to do that, please follow me over to number 14. The rest of you,
I'm a teenager, though.
the visitor center. Our push-ups will be more than